Welcome to Dad's Revenge, where quiet men prove that patience is a strength. Each story here is about a father who is underestimated, disrespected, or betrayed by the very people who should be protecting him, and how that father finds his own way to mend things. Welcome to today's story. They took my house first. Then they took my name. 2 signatures on 2 pieces of paper. One of them was mine. I have built 410 homes in this city. Tonight, I am sitting on a bed that is not mine, behind a door I cannot open. They forgot to check one thing. I poured the foundation of this building. I know every wall in it. That is not a figure of speech. There is 1/8 of an inch of play in the strike plate on the door I am sitting behind, because a man who worked for me hung it in the spring of 2011, and I told him twice to shim it, and he did not. I have known the sound of that latch for 15 years. A minute ago, I heard it from the wrong side. Room 214, 2nd floor, Henrico County, Virginia, 9:40 at night, and a key turning in a lock that I specified in a wall that I set on a floor that I signed for. My name is Otis Mills. I am 70 years old. This is what 16 days cost me. It started on a Tuesday, with Grady Duke knocking on my door at 10 minutes past 6 in the morning. I was already up. I am always up. But Grady lives 3 houses down on Ellery, and Grady does not knock before 8 for anything smaller than a burst pipe. I opened the door and he was standing there in a canvas coat with the collar still folded wrong from the closet, breathing like he had walked faster than a man of 72 ought to walk uphill. "Get your boots," he said. "Good morning to you too." "Otis, get your boots." I asked him how long he had been up. He said since 5:30. I asked him why. He looked past my shoulder into the hallway at the light I leave burning over the porch, and he said, "Couldn't sleep." Then he said, "You remember Wendell Poe over in Roanoke ran the block plant on Shenandoah Avenue?" I said I remembered him. His boy put him in a home last year. Grady scratched the back of his neck. Anyway, boots. That was all he said about it. I have thought about that morning more times than I can count since, and I still do not know if he was telling me something or asking me something. Grady has never in 50 years finished a sentence he was afraid of. We walked up the hill. Churchill North sits on the northern lip of a ridge above the James River, and if you stand at the top of Ellery Street on a clear morning, you can see all the way down to the water and across to the smokestacks on the south bank. Fog was coming up off the river the way it does in late October, filling the low ground first, so the bottom of the hill was gone and the top of it was floating. There were 4 men on my property. They had a tripod set up in the side yard with an instrument on it, and one of them was walking a line with a range pole and another was writing on a tablet. They wore orange vests. There was a white pickup at the curb with a magnetic sign on the door that said Piedmont Land Survey. I stood at the edge of my own yard and watched them for a while before either of them noticed me. "Morning," I said. The one with the tablet looked up and gave me the smile that men give an old man in a bathrobe. I was not wearing a bathrobe. I was wearing work boots and a coat. "Morning, sir. We'll be out of your way shortly." "You are on my grass." "Yes, sir. We've got authorization." "From who?" He looked at his tablet the way people look at a phone when they want to stop having a conversation. "It's a boundary confirmation, preliminary. If you've got a question about it, there's a number on the permit." I did not raise my voice. I have not raised my voice at a job site since 1989, and it does not work as well as people think. I walked past him instead, down the fence line, until I got to the corner of the yard where my wife used to plant. There was a stake in the ground there. It was a piece of lath, about 18 inches long, painted orange on the top 4 inches, driven down into the dirt at the northeast corner of the bed. Whoever set it had put it right through the middle of the ground between where the coneflowers came up in July and where the iron edging turns. I bent down and pulled it out. It came up harder than it should have. Now, a man who has been in construction as long as I have does not think about this the way you might. I was not thinking about flowers. I turned that stake over in my hand and looked at the bottom of it, and then I looked at the hole it came out of, and I crouched there in the wet grass for a good while with my knees complaining because what I was looking at did not make sense. The dirt around the base was settled, packed and gone gray the way disturbed soil goes after it has been rained on and dried and rained on again. There was grass grown up tight against the wood on 3 sides. You do not get that in a morning. You do not get that in a week. That steak had been in my yard for at least 3 weeks. I want to back up here because you need to know what 14 months had already looked like before that Tuesday morning. They started polite. A letter in September of the year before on heavy paper from a company called Ardennes Capital Partners, offering $900,000 for 1400 Ellery Street. I did not answer it. In November, a man called. In January, the number was 1.4 million. In March, somebody put a folder in my mailbox with photographs of what they intended to build on this ridge. 41 attached villas behind a gate, starting at 2.4 million a unit, and they were calling it Ashford Bluff. By June, the offer was $3.1 million for a brick house I bought in 1982 for $11,000. Then the letters stopped, and other things started. A city inspector came out 4 times in 2 months. Once for a deck that has been on the back of that house since Reagan was in office. My homeowner's insurance was not renewed in August, and the letter gave a reason I still cannot read out loud without laughing. Something about proximity to unimproved terrain. And on a Thursday night in September, somebody put a brick through my kitchen window. I did not call anybody about it. I taped cardboard over the hole, and I ordered the glass, and I set it myself on a Saturday. And I did not tell my daughter, and I did not tell my son. That kitchen is not a room to me. I'm going to explain that later. I still had the survey stake in my hand when I walked back to the house. The camera over my front door has been there 4 years. It keeps 30 days of video on a subscription my son set up for me, because I do not care for any of it, and he does. I sat down at the kitchen table, and I rubbed my eyes hard, the way I had been doing since the surgery in August. And I opened the application, and I scrolled back 3 weeks to find the night those men came onto my property. There was no video. Not corrupted, not missing a minute here and there. The whole night was gone 10 in the evening to 5 in the morning, cut clean out of the record like a section of pipe. I sat there a long time. Then I went into the settings the way you do, and I looked at the list of accounts with permission to delete. There were 2. The other account was my son's. I want to be careful here because it would be easy to tell you I knew right then. I did not know. A man can hold a fact in his hand and set it down on the table and walk around it for a day without ever once picking it up. And that is what I did with that fact for about 4 hours. I drove out to the office instead. Mills & Son Homes runs out of a metal building on 9 Mile Road East Side in a light industrial park between a hydraulic shop and a place that rebuilds transmissions. It is not a handsome building. I put it up myself in 1994 with a crew of 6 and a rented boom lift, and the only thing I ever spent extra money on was the slab, because if the slab is right, nothing else can go very far wrong. The lot was full. That was the first thing. Tuesday morning, and there were 19 cars in a lot that holds 22, and I did not recognize 6 of them. A black sedan with rental plates. A Land Rover parked across 2 spaces the way a man parks when he does not intend to be there long. I went in through the shop door instead of the front, which is a habit and not a strategy. Ermias Anthony was standing at the plan table with a set of prints and a cold cup of coffee, and when he saw me, he did something I have never seen him do in 11 years. He looked at the conference room glass, and then he looked back at me, and he set the coffee down. "They start at 8, he said. "What starts at 8? He did not answer that. He said, "Go on in. It's your name on the building." The conference room at Mills & Son has a glass wall on the shop side, because I wanted whoever was sitting in there talking about money to be able to see the men who actually make it. There were 9 people at that table, 3 of mine, 6 I had never laid eyes on, and my son was standing at the head of it with a laser pointer. I have to tell you something about Denver, and I am going to try to tell it straight. He is 41 years old. He has been at this company since he was 23. His title is Chief Executive Officer, and it has been his title for 6 years. And in 6 years, he has not signed a contract over $2 million without calling me first. Not once. That is not a rule I made. I never made that rule. He just calls. But standing at the head of that table, he was good. He was better than I expected. He had the room. He was talking about site drainage on a ridge lot, and he had the numbers right, and one of the men from the rental car was nodding, and I stood there in the doorway in my work coat, and I felt something come up in my chest that I did not have a name for at the time. It was not pride. I have felt pride watching that boy, and I know what it tastes like. Denver saw me. He did not stop talking. He finished his sentence, and then he smiled at the room and he said, "Everybody, this is Mr. Mills. He founded the company." Mr. Mills. 9 people turned around in their chairs. Somebody half stood up. And I said good morning, and I sat down in the chair against the back wall, the one nobody uses, and I let him finish. The slides said Ashford Bluff. 41 units. A gatehouse, 2 entrances off the Ridge Road, one of them running exactly where my side yard is. And I sat in that chair for 11 minutes and watched my son present a subdivision built on top of my house to 6 men I had never met. And not one thing on that screen said the land was not already ours. When it broke up, I waited until the room was down to the 2 of us. Who are they? Consultants. He was gathering cables. Feasibility group. It's preliminary. There was a survey crew on Ellery this morning. Yeah, I heard. He did not look up from the cables. Boundary confirmation. That whole ridge is a mess, Dad. Half those parcels haven't been resurveyed since the 50s. It's basically housekeeping. That is when I felt it. Not the words, the speed. There was no gap in front of the answer. When you ask a man a question he has not thought about, there is a half second where he goes and gets it. Denver did not go and get it. The answer was already sitting in his mouth, folded and pressed, waiting. I have hired 1,100 men in 43 years. I know what a rehearsed answer sounds like. Preliminary, I said. Preliminary. All right. And I let it go. I want you to understand that I let it go on purpose, because there was a second thing I needed to do before I said one more word to my son about anything. My office is at the end of the hall on the north side. I keep it the way I have always kept it, which is badly. There is a drafting table I have not used since 2009, and the metal cabinet with 43 years of job files in it. The computer on the desk was not my computer. It was newer, and the screen was bigger, and there was a sticker on the frame with a service tag on it. I sat down, and it asked me for a password I did not have. There was a card taped to the keyboard tray with a temporary one written in somebody's handwriting. Everything was in the cloud now, the whole archive. Contracts, bids, job files, insurance, the 21 years of correspondence I never threw away. I found the administration page, and I read it twice. There was one administrator on the account. There was one person who could grant access to that archive, revoke access to that archive, or remove anything in it. It was not me. I sat in that chair for a while, with my hand flat on the desk, and I was still sitting there when I felt somebody in the doorway. Blair was standing in the hall. My daughter-in-law is 38 years old, and she sells houses in the West End, and she has never once in 12 years come to this building without a reason. She had a coffee in her left hand. Her right hand was down at her waist holding her phone. The phone was turned toward me. It was upright, the way you hold it when you are recording something, and you do not want the person to know you are recording it. And the little indicator light in the corner of the lens was on. I looked at it. Then I looked at her. She knew that I knew, and she did not put it down. I got home at 20 after 6, and the light was on over the porch. It is a brass fixture with a clear glass chimney and a 60-watt bulb in it, and it has been on every night since the fall of 1997. June used to turn it on at dusk, whether I was coming home or not. She said a dark porch tells the street that nobody in the house is expecting anybody. After she died, I did not turn it off. Not that night, and not the next one. And after a while, there was no particular night on which to start. I sat in the truck at the curb with the engine off, and I looked at it for a minute. The bulb was throwing a yellow circle down onto the boards and out to the second step, and the fog had come back up off the river, and there were moths in it. Somewhere down the hill, a dog was going at something. The porch boards on the left side of the door have a cup in them from the sun, and I have been meaning to pull them and turn them for 11 years. Then I went inside and started supper because Nova comes on Tuesdays. My daughter is 26 years old. She has her mother's hands, and she cannot sit still through a meal without lining up the salt and the pepper and her water glass into a row. And she has been coming to this house every Tuesday since she moved back to Richmond, which is now 2 years and 4 months. She came in at 7 with a grocery bag she did not need to bring. "You look tired," she said. "I look 70. Those are different things, Daddy. We ate at the kitchen table. I made pork chops and greens because that is what I make. She talked about her week the way she does, which is with numbers in it. Nova works for a hospital system downtown. Her title is Compliance Auditor. And what that means in plain language is that she reads medical charts all day looking for the ones that are wrong. Not wrong like a doctor made a mistake. Wrong like somebody wrote a note for a visit that did not happen, or backdated an order, or signed a form on a Tuesday for a patient who was not in the building until Thursday. People think it's dramatic, she said. It's almost never dramatic. It's dates. It's always dates. I asked her what she meant. Everybody's careful about the content. Nobody's careful about the timestamp. If somebody's going to get caught, that's where. I have gone back over that conversation a great many times. She got up to get the picture, and while she was at the counter with her back to me, she said, "Hey, random question. Did Denver ever say anything to you about, I don't know, getting an evaluation, like a checkup?" "What kind of evaluation?" "He called me back in March." She sat down. "He was asking how capacity assessments work for older adults, like the process, who orders it, what the criteria are." "And you told him?" "I mean, yeah, it's public information. It's not a secret." She started lining up the salt and the pepper. He said one of Blair's parents was having some memory stuff and they didn't know what to do. I gave him like a 10-minute explanation. I said that sounded like Denver. That's what I thought. She turned her glass a quarter turn. "It's just, I ran into Blair's mother at the Kroger on Patterson 6 weeks ago, and she was fine. She remembered my name and she remembered I hate cilantro." Neither one of us said anything for a second. Then Nova laughed at herself and said she had been reading too many charts, and I said probably so, and we cleared the plates. And that is the last ordinary hour I have had in my life. I want to tell you about this kitchen now because I said I would. It is 9 feet by 12. There is a window over the sink that faces the side yard, and that is the window the brick came through in September. The floor is 1¼ inch oak that June and I laid ourselves in the spring of 1983 on our knees over 4 weekends. And there are 2 boards near the stove that I cut short and had to shim from underneath, and I know exactly where they are. On the 14th of September, 1997, my wife had a stroke standing at that sink. She was 40 years old. She went down between the sink and the stove. Grady's wife found her at 10 minutes to 4 in the afternoon because she came over about a casserole dish. I was on a job site out in Chesterfield County, 20 minutes away. 22 if you catch the light at Hull Street. That is what I am able to say about it. The phone rang while we were still doing dishes. Nova was at the sink, and I dried my hands and picked it up off the counter, and it was a number I did not know, and I answered it, which I no longer do. "Mr. Mills?" A man's voice, mid-50s maybe, pleasant, unhurried. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad hour, sir." "Who is this?" "My name is Beckham Herring. I'm with Arden Capital Partners." A pause exactly long enough to be polite. "Sir, I've been asked to reach out to you directly. I think you and I ought to sit down together before this gets any harder on you than it needs to be." "Before what gets harder?" "I'd rather do this face-to-face, Mr. Mills. Are you free in the morning?" I told him I was not. "I'll be at the Village Cafe on Broad at 7, he said, as though I had said something else entirely. "I'll wait until 8. Thank you for your time, sir, and I'm sorry to bother your evening." And he hung up. He hung up first. 14 months of people from that company calling my house, and not one of them had ever hung up first. Nova asked who it was, and I told her it was about the Ridge and that it was nothing. She left a little after 8:30. I went looking for batteries. That is all it was. The remote for the television had gone dead, and I keep batteries in the second drawer down next to the stove in a coffee can with rubber bands and screws and 40 years of things without a home. I pulled the drawer all the way out because it sticks, and when I did, a manila envelope came up from underneath the can, folded once, soft at the corners. I did not remember putting it there. I sat down at the table and opened it. Inside was a 4-page document from a law office on Grove Avenue. Limited Healthcare Power of Attorney, Principal Otis Ray Mills, Agent Denver Ray Mills. The date at the top was the 11th of August. The 11th of August was the morning of my cataract surgery. I remember a clipboard in a waiting room with bad chairs. I remember Denver saying they needed the anesthesia consent before they would take me back, and I remember him holding the pen out sideways, the way you do when your hands are full. I turned to the last page. The signature was mine. Not traced, not copied, not forged by anybody's hand, but the one at the end of my own arm. My own name in my own writing, with the little break in the O that has been there since I was 19 years old. Nobody stole anything from me that morning. I gave it to him. I did not sleep. I sat at that table until the sky over the Fulton Yards went the color of dishwater. And then I put on a clean shirt and drove down Broad Street to meet a man I had never seen. The Village Cafe opens at 6:30. At 7 in the morning, it is students and city workers and two old men in the corner booth who have been arguing about the same thing since the Carter administration. It is a loud room. I understood later that he chose it for that reason. Beckham Herring was already there in the second booth from the door facing the entrance. He was 51 or thereabouts. Gray suit, no tie, the kind of haircut that costs money and does not look like it. He stood up when I came in. He did not put out his hand until I was close enough to take it without reaching. Mr. Mills, thank you for coming, sir. I know you told me you weren't free. I wasn't. No, sir. He smiled a little and sat back down. Coffee. He ordered it for me. He ordered nothing for himself, and there was a cup in front of him already full and gone cold, with the little pitcher of cream untouched beside it. In the 50 minutes I sat across from that man, he did not lift it once. I have dealt with hard people my whole working life. I have sat across from union men and bonding agents and a general contractor out of Norfolk who once tried to sue me over a change order for $1,100 and spent $40,000 doing it. Every one of them raised their voice at some point. That is how you know where a man's floor is. Herring never raised his. I'll be direct with you, sir, because I think you'd rather I was. He folded his hands. The offer is not going up. 3.1 was the top of the range, and it left the range about 6 weeks ago. I'm not here to negotiate a price with you. Then what are you here for? Courtesy, he said. I've found it's better if a man hears it from a person than from a piece of paper. Then he took an envelope out of his jacket and laid it on the table between us, and turned it so it faced me. Before we get into it, sir, would you look at something for me? Inside were 4 photographs. Ordinary ones, the kind anybody takes with a phone from across a street. 4 houses. The first was a white frame house with a deep porch and a chain-link fence, big trees somewhere flat. The second was brick 2-story on a corner lot with a hedge. The third had aluminum awnings over the windows, green ones, the kind they put on in the 60s. The fourth was small and low, with a carport tacked onto the side. They were not alike in any way except 2. Every one of them was old, and the people who lived in them had kept them up. And every single one of those photographs had been taken after dark, and in every single one of them there was a light burning over the front door. I looked at those 4 porch lights for a long time. What is this? Those are houses I bought, sir. He said it the way a man tells you what he does for a living at a wedding. I keep photographs of all of them. I like to look at them before we take them down. I put the photographs on the table and I squared them up with the edge because my hands wanted something to do. You want me to be afraid of you? No, sir. He seemed genuinely to consider it. I want you to understand that this is not the first Tuesday morning I have had. That's all. People in your position tend to believe they're the first one, and they spend a great deal of money and about a year of their life finding out otherwise. I'd rather save you the year. That is a threat. It's a schedule, he said. And that is the thing I have never been able to explain to anybody about Beckham Herring. He never threatened me. Not that morning, not later, not once. A threat is a promise, and a promise means there is a decision left to make. He talked the whole time like a man reading me a weather forecast. The waitress came and filled my cup. He waited, and he thanked her by name off the tag. And when she was gone, he put a second envelope on the table, a thick one folded lengthwise. I want you to keep that, he said. Don't open it here. Why not? Because you'll want to be sitting down, sir, and because I don't care to watch. Then he did up the middle button of his jacket, and he stood, and he said the thing that took the floor out from under me, and he said it as gently as a man telling you your headlight is out. Mr. Mills, I haven't been able to reach an agreement with you in 14 months. I want you to know that I stopped trying about 4 months ago. He paused. I reached one with your son instead. I'd hate for you to hear that from a lawyer. He put money on the table for both coffees. His was still full. I sat in that booth by myself until 8:45. I did not open the envelope until I got home. I want to say that was discipline. It was not. I sat in the truck in my own driveway with it on the seat beside me for 11 minutes because some part of me understood that once I read it, I would not be able to go back to being a man who had not read it. It was a filing from the State Corporation Commission. Articles of Organization. Ashford Bluff Holdings Limited Liability Company, organized in the Commonwealth of Virginia, registered agent on East Main Street. There were 4 members listed. 3 of them were entities out of Delaware, with names like Coat Racks. The 4th was a person. Denver Ray Mills, capital contribution $400,000, effective date the 29th of June. 4 months before that survey crew put a stake in my wife's flower bed. 4 months before he stood in my conference room with a laser pointer and told me the word preliminary. He had not been fooled. He had not been pressured or leveraged or backed into anything. He had gone and gotten a checkbook. I sat there and I did the arithmetic on where a man of 41 who has never in his life closed the deal without me gets $400,000. And I did not like any of the answers. Then I went inside and I picked up the phone. I had his name up on the screen. My thumb was on it. And I want to be honest with you now. In a way, I was not honest with myself standing in that kitchen, because I told myself what I was doing was tactics. I told myself that if I called him, he would get his story straight, that I would lose the only advantage I had, that a man does not fire before he is counted. That is all true. It was also not the reason. The reason is that if I called my son and asked him, he was going to answer me, and I was going to have to hear it. I put the phone face down on the counter. Then I went to the closet in the hall, and I got out the gray notebook I have carried on every job since 1986. The one with the grid pages, and I sat down at that table, and I turned to a clean sheet, and I wrote the date at the top. I have never in my life been able to talk to that boy, but I can measure anything. It came in the mail on Thursday, which I have thought about since. Not a process server, not a knock, the mail. It was a stiff envelope with a Henrico County return address, and I opened it standing at the curb with the mailbox door still hanging down. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. In Ray Otis Ray Mills, an alleged incapacitated adult. Alleged incapacitated adult. That is the phrase. That is what they call you. The hearing was set for Monday morning, 3 days. I read the whole thing sitting on my own front steps because I did not trust myself to walk up them. The petitioner was Denver Ray Mills' son. The petition stated that the respondent had exhibited progressive cognitive decline over a period of not less than 8 months. It stated that the respondent had become unable to manage his personal affairs and financial affairs. It stated that the respondent's continued control of substantial assets, including real property, and a majority interest in the closely held corporation, posed a risk of significant financial harm to the respondent. Significant financial harm to the respondent. I built that company out of a 1979 Ford with a bad second gear. 43 years, 410 houses in this county with my name on the permit. And attached to the back of the petition, marked as an exhibit, was a 2-page evaluation signed by a physician named Liam Schwartz. I called my lawyer that afternoon. Not a lawyer. My lawyer, the man who has papered every contract this company has signed since 2001. He listened for 4 minutes, and then he was quiet for longer than I liked. "Otis," he said, "I do construction. This is not construction. It is my name." "I know it is. Listen to me." I heard him get up and shut a door. "You need somebody who does adult guardianship, and you need them today. There's a woman named Melanie Gates on Gray Street. She's the one." I got Melanie Gates on the phone at 10 minutes to 5, and she was walking to her car. And she was in trial in Chesterfield all the following week. "Monday," she said. "They set it for Monday." That is what it says. Of course they did. She was quiet a second. "Mr. Mills, I can't be in 2 courtrooms. I'm going to give you the only 2 pieces of advice that matter, and I need you to write them down. Are you writing?" I said I was. 1. Do not go into that courtroom by yourself. Take anybody. Take a neighbor. Take a stranger off the sidewalk. Judges look at who is sitting behind you. And 2. Do not go anywhere near their doctor. I want to be fair to that woman. She told me. She told me plainly on a Thursday afternoon, and I heard every word she said. And the next morning I got in my truck and drove to a medical office park on Parham Road to go see their doctor. Because I did not understand yet what I was in. I still believe this was a misunderstanding, and misunderstandings get cleared up by the person who is being misunderstood walking into the room. The waiting area had 4 people in it. An old woman by the window with a purse in her lap, and a man in his 40s beside her working his phone. A man about my age with a walker, and the younger woman next to him doing the crossword out of the free paper. A third one, 90 if he was a day, with a woman rubbing his back in slow circles. Every one of them had somebody sitting with them. I sat by myself under the television, and I waited 50 minutes. And I want you to hold on to that number, because it matters against the one that comes next. The nurse called me back at 11:40. Dr. Liam Schwartz was about 47, in a good shirt with no jacket, and he had a tablet propped on a stand at an angle so that it faced away from me. He shook my hand. That is the only time he looked at my face. Mr. Mills, how are we today? I would like to talk about the report you wrote. Sure. He was already tapping. Let's just do a couple of things first. Can you tell me today's date? I told him the date. He tapped. He asked me the year and the season and the county and the floor of the building we were sitting on. He said 3 words and asked me to remember them. He had me count backward from 100 by 7s, and I got to 51 before he said that was fine and moved on. And I want to say for the record that 51 is correct. He asked me to draw a clock showing 10 minutes past 11. I have drawn 10,000 things on paper in my life. I drew his clock. He asked me the 3 words back. I gave him the 3 words back. Then he said, "Any falls recently? Any trouble with stairs?" And in the middle of that, while he was tapping, the stand shifted about an inch when he set his elbow down, and I saw maybe a third of that screen for maybe 2 seconds. It was not a blank form. There was text on it. Paragraphs of it filled in, sitting there under a heading in bold, and the cursor was not anywhere in it. He was typing in a little box off to one side. I said, "What is that?" "That's just your chart, sir. That is a finished report." "Mr. Mills, I really can't get into the record with you." He turned the tablet another 5 degrees away, and he did it without any hurry at all, and that was somehow the worst part of the whole morning. "Your son's attorney can request whatever's discoverable. It is a report about my brain. I understand it feels that way." He stood up. He said somebody would be in touch. He walked out and left the door open behind him, which is what they teach you to do. I looked at my watch in the hallway. 18 minutes. 50 minutes in the waiting room. 18 minutes in the room. I have spent longer than 18 minutes deciding where to put a hose bib, but that is not the thing. The nurse had left a printed sheet on the counter by the door, a routing slip, or a billing summary. I never did find out which. And it had my name on it, and a block of small type at the bottom. I picked it up. Nobody stopped me. It is my name. Most of it meant nothing to me. But there was a line near the bottom that said evaluation completed, and next to it there was a date. I stood in that hallway and I read it 3 times to make sure my eyes were not doing it. The evaluation was dated 6 days earlier, 6 days before the man had ever laid eyes on me. Grady offered to come. I told him not to. I want that on the record, along with everything else, because Melanie Gates gave me 2 pieces of advice on a Thursday, and I threw both of them away inside of 4 days, and a man ought to be able to say out loud what he did to himself. Courtroom 4, Henrico County, Monday morning, 9 o'clock. I wore the dark suit. I have owned it 11 years, and I have put it on twice. Once for Catalina, and once for that. They seat the respondent at a table by himself, not in the gallery, at a table facing the bench with nobody beside him. And the room behind you is a room you cannot see without turning around. I turned around once. Denver was in the 3rd row on the left, with his hands folded, wearing a blue tie I gave him. Blair was in the same row. She was not sitting next to him. There were 3 empty seats between my son and his wife, and I registered it the way you register a hairline crack in a slab, which is to say I saw it and filed it, and did not think about it again for 11 days. Bellamy Glynn stood up, and she was very good. She was 44, and she had a soft voice, and she called me Mr. Mills every single time, and not once in 50 minutes did she say anything unkind about me. That is the part people do not understand. Nobody in that room said I was a bad man. They said I was an old one. She put the videos up on a screen the court provides. There were 4 of them, and none of them ran longer than 10 seconds. In the first one, I am standing in my own kitchen with a cabinet door open, not moving. In the second, I am in the office parking lot and I have my keys out and I am looking at the truck. And I look at it for 6 seconds before I walk to it. The third is me at the plan table asking Ermias what day it is. That one is real. I did ask him. It was a Thursday, and I had been up since 4 with a bid. The fourth one is me sitting at my own kitchen table with the mail in front of me and my hand over my mouth, and I am not doing anything at all. That is the whole video. A man sitting still. 40 seconds total, out of 6 weeks, out of 70 years. And I sat there and I understood in a way that I had not understood in the doctor's office and had not understood on my front steps, that there is no answer to that. You cannot cross-examine a man sitting still. If I stood up and said I was tired, that is what a tired man says. If I stood up and said I was grieving, that is what they were counting on. Then she asked me the question. She did it kindly. She came around the table, so she was not standing over me, and she said, "Mr. Mills, you've told the court you're perfectly capable of running your company. I believe you. So let me ask you something you'd know in your sleep." She looked down at a note. "What type of mortar do you specify for exterior load-bearing masonry?" "I have used it since 1981. I have written it on submittals 10,000 times. I have said it out loud on job sites in 3 counties. I have argued about it with an inspector on Hull Street in the rain. It is 2 characters long, and it was not there." I opened my mouth, and there was a white place where it had always been, and I could see the bag. I could see the bag sitting on a pallet with the seam stitched across the top and the dust coming off it, and I could not read what was printed on it. 3 seconds. I know it was 3 seconds because the court reporter's record shows a pause, and later I asked, and 3 is what it was. But that was not what took me apart. What took me apart was the thing that happened inside those 3 seconds, which is that for the first time in my life, I heard a voice in my own head that was not my voice, and it said, "Calm as anything. What if they are right?" I said, type S. 2 seconds too late. In a room where the whole question was how long a man takes, the radiator under the window came on and knocked twice. There was a fly working the inside of the glass in the top corner, going up and dropping and going up. Somebody in the second row shifted and their coat made a sound against the wood. The clerk's stamp came down, and it came down again. On the table in front of me there was a water pitcher, sweating a ring into the finish, and I watched the ring spread out to the edge of the coaster and stop. My hands were flat on the table. The left one had drywall compound under the thumbnail from Saturday, and I had not gotten it out. Nova came in at 10:10. I heard the door. She sat down in the second row behind me, and she put her hand on the rail near my shoulder, and she did not say anything, and Judge Rogelio Shepard signed the order at 11:40. I want to say something about that judge, because it would be easier for you if he were a villain, and he was not. He was 61, and he looked tired, and he read every page. He granted a temporary guardianship 60 days with a full hearing to follow, and he said on the record that he was not making a finding as to permanent incapacity, and he said that the least restrictive alternative was preferred. And he asked twice whether a residential placement was necessary. Bellamy Glenn said there were concerns about the respondent living alone in a home with a recent break-in. The brick, my kitchen window, I had told nobody. I had taped the cardboard myself and set the glass myself on a Saturday and never said a word to a living soul. They had a police report. Somebody called it in the following morning. There is a case number and a time and a responding officer, and it was not me who made that call. The judge signed. Denver drove me. That is the part I have not been able to put down. He did not have to. There is a company that does it, and Glenn had the paperwork for it, and he said he would take me himself. We went out Broad Street, and neither one of us said anything for 6 miles. At the light before the interstate, I looked out the passenger window, and I could see up the ridge, and I could see the top of Ellery Street from that light. You can. It is one of maybe 2 places in the county where you can. The porch light was off. 29 years, and somebody had gone up to my house and turned it off. He pulled into the lot at Warren House Meadows at 1:10, and he put it in park, and he did not turn off the engine. He said, "They said it's better if I don't come in." And I got out, and I got my bag out of the back, and I shut the door, and I stood there while my son drove out of that parking lot without ever once putting his hand on the shifter with the engine off. The intake room at Warren House Meadows is on the 1st floor, and it has a window that does not open. A woman went through my bag on a table while I sat across from her. She was pleasant about it. She said everything out loud as she took it, the way they are trained to, so that you cannot say later that a thing went missing. 2 shirts, trousers, shaving kit, and she took the razor out of it and set the razor to one side. Reading glasses, a photograph in a frame, and she took the frame apart and gave me back the photograph. Then she came to the tape measure. It is a Stanley 25-foot chrome case, and I have had it since 1984. The blade is worn silver at the first 8 inches from being run over brick. There is a nick in the case where I dropped it off a scaffold on Semmes Avenue. And on the flat of the case on the back, there are 2 letters scratched into the chrome with the point of a nail. J and M. June did that. She did it at the kitchen table one night in the spring of 1984 because I had lost 2 of them that year, and she said if I was going to leave my tools all over Richmond, somebody ought to be able to get them home. The woman turned it over in her hands. "I'm sorry, sir. This one I can't let go up. It is a tape measure. It's got a blade in it. Anything with a blade or a cord or a point, that's the policy on the 2nd floor." She put it in a plastic bag with a number on it and wrote on the outside, "It'll be right here in the property room. You can have it whenever you leave." Santino Olson came in about then. He runs that building. He is 53 and he wears a lanyard, and he has a good handshake and a soft, careful way of talking that I have since learned is not kindness, it is training. I asked him 3 questions in that room, and he answered all 3 of them with the same 4 words. "That's our policy, sir." "Why the 2nd floor?" "That's our policy." "Who authorized the placement?" "That's our policy." "When can I use a telephone?" He smiled when he said that one. He said, "There's a phone at the nurse's station. You just ask." The 2nd floor of Warren House Meadows is a secure memory care unit. I want to be precise about what that means because I did not know it either. It means there is a keypad on the elevator. It means the stairwell doors are on magnetic locks tied to the fire panel. It means the corridor makes a full loop so that a person who walks will keep walking and never arrive at a door that troubles them. I know it means those things because I bid that job. Room 214 is 9 feet 6 by 12 feet even, with a private bath, a window on the north side, a bed, a chair, a wardrobe with no door on it, and a light over the sink that stays on all night at 10%. The door closed at 4:20 in the afternoon. I heard it seat. Then I heard the strike plate take up its play that 1/8 of an inch, and then I heard the key. From the outside, I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time. I could not tell you how long. The window faces north, and there was nothing out of it but a retention pond, and a line of Bradford pears they put in cheap, and a stretch of Parham Road with the lights coming on. Somewhere past 9, a woman came in to do the evening check. Her name was Isabel Smith, and she was about 30 night shift, and she had a clipboard and one of those pens on a coil. She took my blood pressure. She asked me if I knew where I was, and I told her, and she wrote for a while. She wrote for longer than that answer was worth. Then she went out to the hall and stood under the light with my chart open, and she took her phone out of her scrub pocket, and she held it flat over the pages and took a photograph. She did it twice. She turned a page and did it again. I watched her do it through 6 inches of open door. She looked up and saw me watching, and she did not startle at all. She put the phone away and she closed my chart and she said, "Try to sleep, Mr. Mills." And she pulled the door to, and then the key again. 9:40 at night. That is where I started this, and now you know how I got there, and I am going to tell you what I did next, because I have never told anybody, and because I have made my peace with how it sounds. I did not cry. I want to be plain about that. I did not put my hands over my face, and I did not pray, and I did not put my fist through the wardrobe, and I have wondered since whether it would have been better for me if I had. I got down on the floor. I put my back flat against the wall under the window, and I set my right hand on the tile with the thumb touching the baseboard, and I spread it. My hand is 9 inches from the tip of the thumb to the tip of the little finger. It has been 9 inches since I was 20 years old, and it is the first tool I ever had. Then I walked my hand across that floor. Thumb to little finger. Pivot, thumb to little finger. All the way to the far wall, counting under my breath. And when I ran out of floor, I did the short direction, and then I did the closet, and then I got up on my knees and did the height of the windowsill and the width of the casing. I wet the end of my finger, and I wrote the numbers on my palm as I went, the way you do on a job when your pencil is in the truck. Water dries. You have to keep going, or you lose them. I did the whole room twice. The second time was to check the first time, because a man who takes a measurement once and believes it has no business on a job site. 9 feet 6.5, 12 feet even north to south, windowsill at 30 inches, closet opening 32.25, and the west wall. I ran it 3 times because I did not believe it. The room is 9 feet 6.5 at the north end and 9 feet 6.25 at the south end. 2/8 of an inch over 12 feet. I sat on that floor with my palm going dry, and I started to laugh, and it was not a good laugh, and I made myself stop because I knew that 1/4 inch. I had fought a man about that 1/4 inch for 3 weeks in the fall of 2011, standing in the mud on this exact piece of ground with the slab poured and the framing going up, and an architect from Chesterfield telling me it was inside tolerance. It was not inside tolerance. It was a bearing wall out of plumb over a soft spot in the fill. They locked me in a building. I built. I was not in the room for any of what I am about to tell you. I got it from my daughter afterward, in pieces over a long time, and some of it I got out of a transcript. I am telling it the way she told it to me because it is hers and not mine, and because if I skip it, you will not understand what it cost her to save me. On the Wednesday, she stayed at work until everybody else was gone. Nova has a badge that opens the compliance office on the 4th floor. And she has a login that reaches into every chart in that system, because reading charts is her job. She sat down at her own desk, at her own terminal, at 20 minutes past 3 in the morning, and she put the cursor in the search box. And she stopped. She told me she sat there 11 minutes. She said she knew exactly what she was doing. She said that is the part people get wrong about her. She was not confused, and she was not swept up, and there was no moment where it seemed like a gray area. She said she looked at that blinking cursor and did the arithmetic on her whole career and then typed my name in anyway. Liam Schwartz is credentialed at that system. His notes route through it. She found the evaluation in under 2 minutes. 2 pages. Standardized form. Cognitive screening instrument scored. Clinical impression 3 paragraphs. Recommendation for supervised residential placement. And in the header in the field, the software fills in by itself and no human being can edit. There was a creation timestamp. The document had been created at 9:51 in the morning, 6 days before I ever walked into that man's office. She printed it. She printed the audit trail behind it too, which is a thing most people do not know exists. A plain list of every time a record is opened and by whom. Dr. Schwartz had opened my chart exactly twice, once to make the document, once 19 days later for 11 minutes. She drove to Milani Gates on Gray Street at 8 in the morning with the pages in a folder on the passenger seat. Gates had settled her Chesterfield trial on Tuesday. She had been on my case for 36 hours. Nova put the folder on the desk, and Melanie Gates read all of it without saying one word, and then she took her glasses off and set them on the folder and looked at my daughter for a while. "How did you get this?" "It's in our system. He's credentialed with us." "That is not what I asked you." "I pulled it," Nova said, "off my terminal." Melanie Gates is 55 years old, and she has been doing adult guardianship in the state for 22 years, and she has lost more of these than she has won, and she will tell you so in the first 10 minutes. She did not raise her voice either. There is a kind of person in this story who never does. She said, "Nova, listen to me carefully. I believe every word on these pages. I also cannot use them. It's proof. It's a federal privacy violation with your name on the access lock." She tapped the folder. "The minute I put this in front of a judge, the only fact in the room stops being what Schwartz did and starts being what you did. They will not defend the timestamp. They will not have to. Then what do? We do it the slow way. I subpoena the file. I take his deposition. I get a court-ordered independent evaluation for your father, and I put a real neurologist in front of Shepard. Gates leaned back. 8 weeks, maybe 10. And my daughter said the thing that I would have said, and that is the whole trouble with the two of us. She said, he does not have 8 weeks. He has 53 days. I understand her. God knows I understand her. She had a number in her hand and a father behind a keypad, and she is 26 years old, and everything in her told her that the truth is a thing you put on a table and people look at it. She talked Melanie Gates into filing an emergency motion to reconsider. I want to be fair to Gates. She said no twice. She said no, and then she said no again, and then she said on the record in her own office that she was advising against it in writing. And then she filed it because her client's daughter asked her to, and because she is a lawyer and not a judge. The hearing was Friday morning at 9, courtroom 4, same room. They brought me down for it in a van with a man riding in the back with me. Nova testified. She was steady. She laid out the timestamp and the audit trail and the 2 accesses and the 11 minutes. And while she was talking, I watched Bellamy Glenn, and Bellamy Glenn was not writing anything. She was not writing anything because she was not going to need it. When Nova finished, Glenn stood up and she said, "Just one question, Your Honor." She turned to my daughter and she said it pleasantly. "Miss Mills, by what authority did you access your father's protected health information?" That was all. That was the entire cross-examination. 11 words. Nova said, "I'm a compliance auditor. I have system access." Were you auditing his chart? No. Was there a signed authorization, a subpoena, or a court order? No. Thank you, Bellamy Glenn said, and she sat down. Judge Shepard excluded all of it, not because he thought it was false. He said so out loud, and I have that line marked in the transcript. He said the court was troubled by what it had heard and that the court could not consider it. Those are 2 different sentences, and they both came out of the same man in the same minute. Then Glenn stood back up and said she had one more matter. The hospital's own privacy office had already been notified. That was Wednesday afternoon, 10 hours after Nova logged in, because those systems flagged themselves and nobody has to make a phone call. Nova was suspended without pay pending investigation. Her badge was gone. Her license to do the only work she has ever wanted to do was in front of a board. And on that basis, Bellamy Glenn moved for a protective order restricting my daughter's contact with me on the grounds that she had misused my confidential medical information and posed a risk of instability to a vulnerable adult under the court's protection. Judge Shepard looked at that motion for a long time. He granted it, pending the full hearing. They moved me that afternoon, not out of the unit, deeper into it, to a room on the inside of the loop with no window at all, which they explained was for residents who show elevated agitation. And I had not raised my voice one time in 6 days. There was a common room down the hall with a window on the north side, and they let us sit in there in the evenings. I stood at that window on Friday night, and I looked northeast toward the ridge, and I stood there past 10, and I want to tell you that there was nothing to see. Not darkness, trees, a water tower with a red light on it, 4 miles of somebody else's houses. You cannot see Church Hill from Warren House Meadows. I knew that. I bid that job. I stood there anyway. On the 3rd morning in the inside room, a nurse told me I had a visitor and that I could use the family conference room off the lobby. I had not had a visitor. Nobody had come. Not one person in 9 days. They walked me down in the elevator with a badge, and I understood before the doors opened that it was not going to be my son, because my son had a key to the whole building and would not have needed a conference room. Beckham Herring was sitting at the end of a table with nothing in front of him but a pen and 1 sheet of paper. He stood up. He waited until I was seated before he sat back down. "Mr. Mills, you look thinner, sir. They serve supper at 4:30. "Yes, sir. They do that everywhere." He said it like a man agreeing about the weather. "How's the room?" I did not answer that. He turned the paper around and slid it across. It was 1 page, not a contract, a letter of intent, 3 paragraphs with a signature block at the bottom, and my name typed under the line. "That's a transfer of your interest in 1400 Ellery Street," he said. "You'll want to read it, and I hope you will. but I'll tell you what it does because I'd rather you hear it from me.
Go ahead.
You signed that this morning, and by close of business tomorrow, the petition for guardianship is withdrawn. He folded his hands. Not dismissed on the merits, withdrawn, the petitioner simply stops. Dr. Schwartz's evaluation becomes a piece of paper nobody ever asks about again. There's no hearing. There's no finding. You are in your own kitchen by Friday. And the house comes down in March, he said. I sat there and looked at that page for a while. Can I ask you something, sir? Whose idea was my son? And Beckham Herring did something then that I did not expect and have never been able to forget, which is that he answered me honestly. Nobody's, he said. That's not how it works. I don't recruit anybody, Mr. Mills, and I want you to understand that because it's going to matter to you later. He turned his hand over on the table. I buy land. When a parcel won't move, I go find out why, and generally the why is one man who won't sell. So then I look at that man's family, and I find out whether there's somebody in it who already believes he's owed something. And if there is not, then I go do something else with my week. He shrugged very slightly. There usually is. You paid for the lawyer. Our den funds the legal work. That's a service we provide. He said it exactly the way a bank teller tells you about overdraft protection. The family files, the physician evaluates, the court decides, and then, sir, at the end of all that, I sit down with whoever the court has appointed, and I make them a fair market offer. And they take it because they are not emotional about the property. That's the whole of it. There is nothing in that sequence that any court in this Commonwealth has ever found a thing wrong with. Because nobody ever got that far. Because nobody ever got that far, he agreed. He looked at his hands. You're the fifth, he said. The 4 before you all signed. I thought about 4 photographs on a table in a diner on Broad Street. 4 old houses in the dark. 4 lights burning over 4 front doors and 4 people inside those houses who did not know yet that a man was standing across the street taking their picture. Where are they now? I said. That's not something I keep up with, sir. You keep photographs. I keep photographs of the houses, Beckham Herring said. I want to tell you exactly what I did next, because I have gone back and forth for a long time about whether it was courage. It was not. I have thought about it a great deal, and I am fairly sure that if the house on Ellery had been any other house, any of the 410 I put up in this county, I would have signed that letter before he finished talking. I would have signed it and gone home and started a war from my own kitchen table with a telephone and a lawyer, which is a better place to fight from than a locked hallway, and any man with sense would tell you so. But it was that house. It was that kitchen. There are 2 boards near the stove that I cut short in 1983 and shimmed from underneath, and my wife was on her knees beside me when I did it, and she laughed at me for it, and she is not anywhere else in the world. If I signed that page, I would have to be a man who sold that. So it was not courage. It was that I could not carry the other thing. I pushed the paper back across the table. No. He did not sigh. He did not lean forward and tell me to think about it, and he did not tell me I was making a mistake. He picked the page up and squared it and put it back inside his jacket, and he capped the pen. Can I ask you something now? I said. Of course, sir. Ellery Street was cut through that ridge in 1922. The whole north slope below your entrance road is fill. It has been sitting there 100 years, and nobody has ever put anything heavy on it. I put my hands flat on the table. What are you putting under those 41 units? He looked at me. Our engineers handle that. Who is your geotech? I'd have to check the name. You have been buying that ridge for 14 months, I said, and you do not know the name of the firm that told you the ground would hold? Beckham Herring did not answer me. It is the only question I ever asked that man that he did not have a finished sentence ready for. And I have thought since that it was because nobody had ever asked him one before. Then he stood up and did the middle button of his jacket. 53 days, Mr. Mills, he said. What happens in 53 days? The temporary order becomes a permanent one. There's a hearing, but it's not the kind of hearing you're thinking of. He pushed his chair in. After that, sir, nobody has to ask you anything ever again. He thanked the nurse at the desk by name off her badge. I watched him go out through the front doors into a parking lot I had graded, and I stood there in the lobby of my own building with a man behind me waiting to walk me back to the elevator. And I started counting. 53 days. 1,272 hours. I have built a house in less. The next morning, I started walking. I did not tell anybody why. I got up after breakfast, and I went out into the corridor, and I walked the loop. And when I got back to where I started, I turned around and walked it the other way. And then I did it again. The trade word for that floor plan is a racetrack. I told you about the loop. It is a kind thing and a cruel thing at the same time, and I have built 4 of them. I walk that loop 11 times a day for 4 days. I know what went in my chart because I have read it since. Resident ambulating without apparent purpose. Increased motor restlessness. Redirected to room cooperative. Here is what I was doing. My stride is 30 inches. It has been 30 inches since I was 22 and did not own a 100-foot tape. And it never leaves you. 403 steps a lap. That is a little over 1,000 feet of corridor. I did the rooms off the doors, 22 of them on the outside wall. I did the utility core off the electrical panels because panels sit on a common wall and the wall has to be somewhere. And on the 4th day, standing in the corridor outside the day room with my hands in my pockets, I came out with a number. 4,312 square feet. Now I want you to understand what that number did to me because it has nothing to do with escaping anything. In February of 2011, I sat at a folding table in a trailer on Parham Road, and I signed the bid sheet for the 2nd floor of that building. Secure memory care, 4,312 square feet, $189 a foot. With the millwork. I had not thought about that number in 15 years. And I stood in that hallway in a cardigan they gave me 9 days into being an alleged incapacitated adult with a court order on file in Henrico County saying my mind was going and I had just paced out a building from memory and hit it on the nose. I put my hand on the corridor rail and I stayed there a while. I am not going to make more of that than it was. It did not get me out. It did not unsign anything. But there had been a voice in a courtroom asking me what if they are right, and it had been talking to me every night at 3 in the morning for 9 nights, and that afternoon I told it to sit down. Then I got to work. A building will tell you where it is weak if you know how to ask, and there were 3 things I knew about that floor that nobody on the staff had any reason to know. The first was the laundry. There is a service chase behind the laundry room wall 3 feet clear, running from the utility core out to the mechanical room. And it exists because the architect put the risers on the wrong side of the plan. That chase is not on the life safety drawings. It is a hole we left in the middle of a building. The second was the mechanical room door on the north end. It is never seated properly a day in its life because it sits over the soft spot in the fill on the west side, the same 1/4 inch I fought a man about for 3 weeks. The frame is racked. If you push at the strike side, it holds. If you push low at the hinge style, it walks. The third was the pump room. When we built that building, the fire pump had a dedicated analog telephone line, copper, run out to the demarcation on the north wall, because that was code in 2011. Everything went over the network 4 or 5 years later. Nobody ever pulls copper. It costs money to pull it, and it costs nothing to leave it. That line was still in that room. I would have bet the company on it. On the 5th night, I got up at 2 and went down the corridor to the laundry. I was standing at that door with my hand flat on the frame, feeling for the chase behind it, when the light came on behind me. Isabel Smith was at the end of the hall with her cart. We looked at each other. There is no version of that sentence that helps a man in my position. She said, "Mr. Mills, let me walk you back." She did not touch my arm. She walked beside me all the way around the loop to my room, and she did not say one word, and she did not go to the nurse's station. And when we got to my door, she came in with me, and she pulled it to behind her most of the way. Then she took something out of the pocket of her scrubs and set it on the table by the bed. A Stanley tape measure, 25 foot, chrome case, worn silver at the first 8 inches. A nick in the side from a scaffold on Semmes Avenue. J&M scratched into the back with the point of a nail. Property room's got a sign-out log, she said. It's got my name on it, so don't leave it laying out. I picked it up. It is 19 ounces. It felt like more than that. You took photographs of my chart, I said. Yes, sir, I did. Why? She looked at the door for a second. Because you're the 4th one, she said. Same lawyer on the paperwork, same doctor's name on the evaluation, Same 3 or 4 weeks between when the family files and when the truck shows up at the house. She shook her head once. I've been here 6 years. First 2 I thought it was a coincidence, and the other 3. The first 3 didn't get out, Isabel Smith said. I sat down on the edge of that bed with my wife's tape measure in my hand. I've written letters, she said. Nobody answers a letter from a night shift LPN. But there's a man at the Attorney General's office, Elder Abuse Unit, and he wrote me back one time. One time in 3 years. She said the name twice, so I would have it. Alan Wynn. Then she said goodnight and went out and pulled the door to. And about 4 seconds later, I heard the key. But I had my wife's tape measure in my hand, and a service chase 40 feet down the hall, and a name I could spell. For the first time since my son drove out of that parking lot with his engine running, I had something to measure. Isabel came back the next night with a piece of paper folded into eighths. 4 surnames, 4 cities: Norfolk, Fredericksburg, Roanoke, Newport News. That's off the front of a file, she said. Records transferred 2 years ago. I read it standing there and wrote it down in my car. Anybody can look those up. They're circuit court. They're public. I put that paper in my sock because a cardigan they give you has no pockets. I went out on the 7th night at 2:17 in the morning. The trick to a locked hallway is that nobody locks the parts of a building that were never meant to be seen. They lock doors. A service chase is not a door. It is the space between 2 things. The laundry has a louvered access panel low on the east wall, 22 inches square, held by 4 quarter-turn fasteners. And it is there because a man has to get to the risers. I turned all 4 with the tip of my wife's tape measure, and I laid the panel on the floor, and I went in on my hands and knees at 70 years old, and my shoulder caught, and I had to go back out and take the cardigan off and go in again in my undershirt. 3 feet clear, concrete on one side and gypsum on the other. Cold the way only that space is cold and dark and smelling of dust burnt onto a hot water line. I have been in 100 of them. I have never once been in one at night with a court order saying I could not be trusted to manage my own affairs. The chase runs 61 feet to the mechanical room. I counted it going in. The mechanical room door opens into that chase. I put my hand flat on it at the strike side and pushed, and it held the way it has held for 15 years. Then I got down and put my shoulder low against the hinge stile, and I leaned. It walked. Not much. Enough. The latch bolt came out of a strike plate it had never fully been in, and that door swung open into a mechanical room with hot water pipe overhead and one bare bulb burning on a pole chain. The pump room was through the far side. Motor oil, standing water, and the dead smell of a floor drain that has never once been used. A fire pump on a housekeeping pad I poured. A jockey pump, a panel, and on the north wall, 4 feet up, screwed to a scrap of plywood, a beige telephone. 15 years of dust on the handset thick enough to hold a thumbprint. I picked it up, and there was a dial tone. I stood in that room, and I listened to a dial tone for longer than I care to admit. And then I called the only number I have known by heart since 1978. He picked up on the second ring. Grady Duke does not sleep. Who is this? It is Otis. There was a sound on that line I am not going to try to describe. They said you can't have calls, he said. Grady, I need you to write. Do you have a pen? He got a pen. I read in the 4 surnames and the 4 cities twice each, and I told him to go to the circuit court clerk in each one and ask for guardianship petitions filed in the last 4 years. Pay for copies. Explain nothing. They do not ask you why. It is a counter and a fee. What am I looking for? The petitioner's attorney and the physician on the evaluation. And if it's the same, then get me the dates, I said. Every date on every page. Filing date, evaluation date, sale date on the property. He read it all back to me. He has been reading things back to me since we were 24 years old on a framing crew in Petersburg. Then he did not hang up. Otis, I am here. I took an envelope. The pump kicked on behind me and ran for 11 seconds and shut off. Say that again. 6 weeks before all this. His voice had gone flat the way it does. Man came to my door. Not the one in the suit, a younger one. Offered me $120,000 for my house. 3 houses down from you, and mine's smaller, and mine needs a roof. Grady, there was a condition. He stopped. Condition was I talk to you, not push you. Just talk to you. neighbor to neighbor. Tell you it was a good number, and you're 70 years old, and what do you want with a hill? I stood in that room with the receiver against my ear. I took it home, he said. I put it on the kitchen table, and I sat and looked at it. Then I went to bed and got up the next day, and it was still on the table. And I did that 4 days, Otis. 4 days I walked past it. What did you do? I gave it back. All right. That's not the part. He made a sound. The part is I never told you. You come out to my truck for coffee, 10 times since then. And I stood there and I let you talk about that ridge and I never said one word. I have thought about what I said next a great deal. I said, how long was it on the table? 4 days. Then it took you 4 days to say no. And it took my son about 4 minutes to say yes, I said. Go to Norfolk in the morning. I heard him breathe out. He is my oldest friend on this earth, and he carried that envelope for 6 weeks after he gave it back, and I did not have one thing left in me to spend on being angry at him. I hung up the phone and put it on the hook and wiped the dust off the handset with my sleeve, which was a foolish thing to do, and I did it anyway. Then the light came on in the mechanical room behind me. I heard the door I had walked open swing against the stop, and I heard 2 people, and I heard a radio. There is no place to go in a pump room, so I sat down on that wet floor with my back against the housekeeping pad in my undershirt at 3 in the morning, and I let my mouth come open a little, and I looked at the wall. When the flashlight came around the corner, I turned my head toward it slow, and I said, "Is it Thursday?" And they were so relieved. You have never seen 2 people so relieved in your life. One of them crouched down and put a hand on my shoulder and said it was Wednesday, honey. And the other one got on the radio and said, "No injuries, wandering second floor." They walked me back the long way through the corridor with a blanket on me. I have never lied about my mind before, not once in 70 years. And going up that hallway with a woman's hand under my elbow, I understood that I had just picked up their weapon and put it in my pocket, and that it was going to cost me something later that I could not yet see the shape of. Grady came to see me on a Thursday. The protective order named my daughter. It did not name a 72-year-old retired framing foreman, and nobody at that front desk had thought about that. They walked me into the day room, and Grady Duke was standing by the window with his hat in his hands. He had put on a tie. I have known that man since the Ford administration, and I have seen him in a tie 4 times, and 3 of them were funerals. They said 30 minutes, he said. Then talk fast. He sat down at a laminate table with a jigsaw puzzle on it that nobody in that building has ever finished. And he took a folded sheet out of his coat. He had been to all 4 clerks' offices in 6 days. Norfolk, then Fredericksburg, then Newport News, then Roanoke, sleeping in his truck twice because a motel is $40 and a truck is nothing. Norfolk was a woman of 81 Brick House, 4 blocks off the water, petition filed by a nephew. Temporary guardianship in 19 days. She signed 11 weeks later, and the house came down that spring. Fredericksburg was a man of 79, with 4 acres and a barn. 61 days from filing to closing. Newport News was a widow. Same. And Roanoke, Grady said. And then he stopped and turned the page over and looked at the back of it, which he does when he is deciding something. What? The Roanoke files got a piece missing, he said. Clerk went and looked twice. I let that go by. I have thought since about how easy it was to let that go by. Then he read me the 2 lines that mattered. Every one of those 4 petitions was filed by an attorney named Bellamy Glenn, and every one of those 4 files had a fee affidavit stating that the petitioner's legal costs were advanced by a third party. That is a thing you have to disclose, and nobody ever reads. 4 different limited liability companies, all 4 with a registered agent at the same address on East Main Street in Richmond. I sat there in a cardigan with the puzzle of a lighthouse in front of me. He told me I was the 5th, I said. He told you the truth then. Grady said Melanie Gates had all of it on her desk by Tuesday, and that a man from the Attorney General's office walked out of that meeting like somebody had handed him a live wire. Alan Wynn is 44, and he runs an elder abuse unit with 4 investigators for 8.5 million people. He had answered a night shift nurse's letter 3 years ago because it was the only one that week with a case number in it. He told Gates that he had 2 of those 4 files already, separately, 2 different complaints from 2 different years opened, worked, and closed, because in each one the elderly person had signed the deed and would not say they had been coerced. And a signature is a signature. Nobody had ever put the four of them on one table. He said something to your girl, Grady told me. He said this isn't 4 crimes. He said 4 crimes is a spree. This is a product. Then Grady got to Ermias. Ermias Anthony has run my job sites for 11 years, and he does not talk in meetings. Back in July, my son asked him to come in on a Saturday and witness some signatures. 11 documents. Ermias signed as witness on all 11. And because he has spent 11 years watching me photograph every completed inspection, he ran the whole stack through the copier before he left and put it in a tube with a set of prints in the bed of his truck. It sat there 4 months. He brought that stack to Melanie Gates on Tuesday morning. Grady said she read them twice, the second time with a pencil, not making notes, underlining, going slower and slower, until she stopped on page 31 and sat back and said nothing for about a minute and a half. Then she said, "Oh," not "oh good," not "oh no," just the sound. 8 of those 11 documents are what my son believed all 11 of them were. Operating agreement, capital call, subscription documents, the ordinary paper of a man buying into a real estate deal. 3 of them are something else. The first one is a personal indemnity. Denver Ray Mills individually agrees to indemnify and hold harmless Arden Capital Partners and its affiliates against any claim action or proceeding arising out of or relating to the guardianship petition. Individually, not the company, him. The second one designates him managing member of Ashford Bluff Holdings for all regulatory and reporting purposes. He is the only natural person in that entity. Everything else is a Delaware address. When a prosecutor pulls that file, there is one human name on it, and it is not Beckham Herring, and it never was in Norfolk or Fredericksburg or Newport News either. The third one is 1 page. It is a certification signed by my son that the medical documentation submitted in support of the guardianship petition is accurate and complete to the best of his knowledge and belief. He certified Liam Schwartz's evaluation. He certified a document that was created 6 days before the examination it describes, and he put his own name under it, and there is no version of what happens next where that piece of paper is not the worst thing in the room. Grady stopped reading and folded the sheet up. "He ain't a partner in this thing, Otis," he said. "No. He's the padding." That is the word he used. He is a framer. When you set a beam in a masonry pocket, you wrap the end of it because the beam is going to move and the wall is not. And whatever you put between them is the thing that gets crushed. I looked out that window at the parking lot for a while. 41 years old. Sitting in a conference room in July with a pen in his hand and a man in a good suit telling him, "This one is yours, son. This is the one where you don't have to call your father." And he signed 11 pieces of paper and read 8 of them. He is a grown man. He filed that petition. He turned off my porch light and he drove me out here with the engine running, and he did not come inside. And he was also at the same time and in the same room a boy being robbed. Both of those are true. I have had a long time to look for a way that only one of them is true, and there is not one. Your girl asked the lawyer something, Grady said. At the end, asked her what? Asked her, does he know? I said nothing. Gates told her no. Grady put his hat on. And she told her if anybody in this family says one word to that boy before the hearing, they'll pull him out and settle him, and there won't be a case. 30 minutes was up. A woman came to the door. Grady stood and shook my hand and held on to it a second longer than a man does. Then he said the thing I had been waiting 11 days for somebody to say. "Doctor's coming Monday," he said. A real one. Dr. Macy Tang spent 3 hours and 10 minutes with me. She is 39 and she came out to Warren House Meadows on a Monday with a rolling case and a laptop. And she took a conference room and shut the door and did not let anybody else in it. She started by asking me what I did for a living. Not what I used to do, what I do. Then she gave me a test that ran an hour and 40 minutes. Trail making both parts. Verbal fluency timed. Digit span forward and back. A word list she read me 4 times and came back to 20 minutes later when I had stopped expecting it. Clock drawing, and she watched me draw it instead of watching a screen. Somewhere in the middle of it, she put her pen down. "Mr. Mills, there's an incident note in your chart from the 16th, 3 in the morning in a mechanical space. Staff documented disorientation. You asked what day it was." I sat there. "Is that accurate?" she said. "I want to tell you that I thought about it for a while." I did not. "No, ma'am." "Tell me what happened." "I knew what day it was," I said. Two people were coming down a hallway with a flashlight, and I was 70 years old on a wet floor in my undershirt where I had no business being, and I gave them the only thing that would make them stop asking questions. She wrote for a long time. "I'm putting that in the report," she said. "I understand." "No, sir, I don't think you do." She turned the laptop a few degrees. A man with the deficits alleged in this petition does not have the executive function to construct a false presentation under stress and then report it accurately to a stranger 11 days later. What you just told me is the most useful thing anybody has said to me all morning. Her report ran 19 pages. The summary is one sentence long, and I have it memorized. No evidence of neurocognitive disorder. Performance across all domains within or above expected range for age and education. Melanie Gates filed it Wednesday with an emergency motion. Judge Shepard read it that afternoon, and by 4 o'clock he had suspended the placement pending the full hearing and vacated the order keeping my daughter away from me. Nova came to get me at 5:30. They walk you out through the lobby. They give you a plastic bag with your razor in it, and the woman at the desk said, "Take care now." I got as far as the middle of the parking lot, and I stopped. Second week of November, already dark. The light over that entrance is one of 206 fixtures on a schedule I priced in 2010. There is a stone at the corner of the walk with the year cut into it. The brick is a modular running bond with a soldier course over the openings, and I know the mason, and he is dead now, and he was good. I stood there in the cold, in the parking lot I had graded, and I looked at it for a while, and my daughter waited by the car and did not say one word to me the whole time. Then I got in and we drove. We were on Parham Road before she said anything. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me get through it." "All right." He called me in March. Her hands were at 10 and 2, and she did not take them off. And I gave him everything. The standard for a petition. What a court wants to see. That the evaluation carries the most weight, and that judges follow the physician. I gave him the whole roadmap daddy in about 10 minutes on a Tuesday, and I was proud of myself because he never asks me about my work. Nova, I did that. She was not crying. She got that from her mother. You were in there 11 days because I was flattered. I let a mile go by because I have learned exactly one thing in my life about my children, and it is that they cannot hear you while they are still talking. Then I said, he would have found it in an afternoon. That's not the point. No, I said, it is not. But it is still true, and you are going to need both of those. We came up Ellery at 6:15. There was a car in front of my house, a white Mercedes. My daughter-in-law was standing on my walk in a wool coat with her arms folded, and she had been there long enough to be cold. Nova started to get out, and I put my hand on her arm. Give me 10 minutes. Blair did not apologize. I want that understood. In 11 minutes on that front walk, she did not say one word about being sorry, and I have come to think that was the only honest thing about the entire conversation. She said, I have everything. Everything. Every text between Denver and Beckham Herring going back to May. Every voice memo. I have the pictures of the 4 houses because Denver sent them to me the same night. She shifted her purse. It's on a drive and it's not in my house. And what do you want? I want you to leave alone what's in my name, she said. The house on Rockhurst, the account at Wells Fargo, the Range Rover. That's it. You take all of it to your lawyer. You burn our den down. I don't care. I want a written agreement that you're not coming after me. I looked at that woman on my own front walk. You filed for divorce, I said. 10 days ago. What day? She did not blink. The 4th of November, the Monday. The day a judge signed an order and my son drove me out to Henrico with the engine running and did not come inside. She filed that morning. She sat in that courtroom 3 seats down from him with the papers already stamped. He does not know, I said. He'll get served after the hearing. My attorney thought the timing was better. And then she said the thing I am going to carry because it explained the last 14 months better than anything else had. You know I never hated you, Blair said. Denver hated you. I sat at that table at Thanksgiving for 12 years listening to it, and I never once agreed with him. She looked past me at the door. I just wanted house number 12. It's the corner unit. It's got the view down to the river." I told her no. She asked me if I understood what I was turning down. I told her that a man who trades with her ends up owing her, and that she could take her drive to Alan Wynne at the Attorney General's office like anybody else, and they would decide what it was worth without asking me. She stood there a moment. Then she said, "Fine." And she walked to that Mercedes and got in it. And she checked her mirror before she pulled out, which I have thought about since. Nova came up the walk, and I turned around and looked at my own house for the first time in 11 days. The light was on over the porch. The bulb was throwing that yellow circle down onto the boards and out to the second step the way it has since the fall of 1997. And there were no moths in it because it was November. 3 days ago, Nova said, I still had a key. I have put that Friday evening together the way you rebuild a wall from the pieces on the ground. Some of it is from Ermias, who was on that site until 6. Some of it is phone records that went in as exhibits. Some of it is from a statement my son gave later under oath with a lawyer beside him. I have spent more time on that one evening than on any other 4 hours of my life, and I know exactly why, and I am going to tell you at the end of it. At 5:40 on the 14th of November, Denver stood outside the construction fence at Ashford Bluff. There was nothing behind that fence. 12 acres of graded dirt and a silt fence, and 2 portable toilets and a sign with an architect's watercolor on it. And no equipment, because there was no contract. Mills & Son had never been awarded that work. There was no letter of intent. There was no bid package. Ermias had asked him about it twice in October, and my son had said the same word to him that he said to me. Preliminary. He called Beckham Herring at 5:41. That was the 9th call in 6 days. Somebody answered. It was a young woman, and she was pleasant about it. And she said, "Mr. Herring isn't handling this project anymore, sir. Can I take a number?" I have listened to a great many people describe the moment the floor goes out from under them. It is never the shouting part. The shouting part comes later, if it comes. The first thing is small and administrative. A young woman with a headset saying a name is not attached to a thing anymore. He drove home. The house on Rockhurst is 4,000 square feet with a 2-story entry, and I've never liked it, and I helped him buy it. The closet was empty. Not emptied in a hurry. There is a difference, and Ermias would know it, and so would I. The hangers were put back on the rail. Her side of the bathroom was wiped down. Somebody had taken the time to leave a room the way you leave a hotel. On the kitchen island, there was a manila envelope. Complaint for divorce, filed in Henrico County Circuit Court on the 4th of November, stamped by the clerk at 9:12 in the morning. 9:12. Judge Shepard signed the guardianship order at 11:40 that same day. She filed 2.5 hours before her husband won. My son sat down at that island and read a complaint that said his wife had been separately domiciled since August, which was news to him, and that she was seeking the Rockhurst house and the Wells Fargo account and one vehicle. And he sat there for a while. Then he went out to his car and got the closing binder. This is the part I have thought about the most. 11 documents. He had signed all 11 in a conference room in July, with Ermias witnessing, and he had read 8 of them, and he had never once gone back. He took out the last 3. He tried to read them at that kitchen island at 7 o'clock at night with his wife's hangers on the rail upstairs, and he could not do it. That is not a figure of speech. Indemnification language is written to be unreadable by the person signing it. There are 400 words in that first paragraph, and one verb that matters, and it is buried in the middle of clause C. He read the same page 3 times, and then my son did the thing he has done every single time in 41 years that a piece of paper has gotten away from him. He picked up his phone and he called his father. At 8:14 that night, the phone on my kitchen counter lit up and rang 1 time and stopped. I remember it. I was standing at that sink. I had been home 4 hours. I looked at that phone and the screen said his name, and then it said the call had ended, and there was a little entry in the log with no length to it at all. I thought it was a mistake, a pocket, a dropped bar of signal. I have known for a long time now that it was not. He got 1 ring into calling me, and he hung up. And I want to be very careful here because it would be easy for me to stop this story right there and let you sit with a picture of a boy at a kitchen island who almost came home. That is not what happened next. What happened next at 8:19, 5 minutes later, is that Denver Ray Mills called Bellamy Glenn. The transcript of that call is not long. He asked her whether the full hearing could be moved up. He asked whether a permanent order would foreclose any later challenge from a family member. He asked, and this is the line I have never been able to put down, whether the guardian would have authority to convey real property without further court approval. He had the papers in front of him. He knew something was wrong. And with the phone in his hand, and his father's name still sitting at the top of the recent calls, he chose to try to finish it faster. Both things are true. I have told you that before, and I will not tell you again. Melanie Gates got a call the next morning at 8:10. It was Alan Wynn, and he did not say hello. He said, "The Roanoke file is short a page because there wasn't a closing." Gates said he didn't sign. He didn't sign, Wynn said. Wendell Poe, 74, ran a concrete block plan on Shenandoah Avenue for 31 years. Son filed in March, temporary order in April. Placement in a secure unit outside Salem in May. A pause. He never signed anything. 11 months later, he died in that unit. Of what? Certificate says natural causes, cardiopulmonary arrest. Attending physician signed it. Nobody ordered an autopsy because nobody asked for one. She heard paper. The property sold 9 weeks after the funeral. The estate sold it. Same buyer. My daughter was in that office. She has told me she watched Melanie Gates take her glasses off and hold them. How many people know that man's name? Gates said. Right now, Wynn said, counting you and me, 4. Nova asked what happened to the son. Nothing happened to the son. He inherited a parcel of land, and he sold it, and he lives in North Carolina, and no one has ever asked him a question about any of it. And he has never been called anything but a grieving family member on a single piece of paper in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Gates put the phone down on her desk and left her hand on it. Then she said, "We are not fighting about a hill anymore." I heard Wendell Poe's name for the second time in my life that afternoon. The first time was on my own front steps at 10 minutes past 6 in the morning from a man in a canvas coat with his collar folded wrong, who told me a story about somebody's boy putting somebody's daddy in a home, and who then said, "Anyway, get your boots." Grady had been trying to tell me for 16 days. The full hearing was on the 2nd of December, courtroom 4. Same bench, same clerk, same radiator that knocks. I did not wear the dark suit. I wore the coat I wear to a job site, canvas, a burn on the left cuff from a cutting torch in Chester, bought for me by my wife the year Denver started school. Melanie Gates looked at it in the hallway and did not say one word about it. The gallery was not empty this time. Grady, Ermias, Isabel Smith, who had traded a shift and sat in the back row in street clothes looking like she might be sick. 4 men off my cruise that nobody had called who heard it from Ermias and put in for the day. Denver sat on the left with Bellamy Glenn. Beckham Herring sat in the last row on the right alone in a gray suit. Melanie Gates put on 3 witnesses, and it took 2 hours and 11 minutes. The first was Dr. Macy Tang. 19 pages, no evidence of neurocognitive disorder. Glenn cross-examined her for 6 minutes and got nothing because there was nothing to get. The second was my daughter. She was not there as a compliance auditor. She was suspended, and her matter was in front of a board, and she said so on the record in her first 90 seconds, because Gates put it there before Glenn could. And then Melanie Gates handed her a document that had come out of the court's own file. Not a hospital system, not a login. The petition itself with Exhibit A attached, filed by Bellamy Glenn, stamped by the clerk of this court in this building at 4:11 in the afternoon on the 10th of October. Exhibit A is Dr. Liam Schwartz's evaluation of my mental capacity. I sat in that courtroom for 4 hours before it was over, and I never once had to look at the exhibit because I knew what it said. What I did was watch the back of my son's neck. Nova read the clerk's stamp out loud. October 10th. Then Gates put up the second page, which was Schwartz's own billing record produced under a subpoena that Judge Rogelio Shepard had signed himself. Date of service, October 16th. 6 days later, Melanie Gates let that sit there for a good while. Then she said, "Your Honor, the physician's examination of Mr. Mills occurred 6 days after his evaluation of Mr. Mills was filed with this court." The radiator came on and knocked twice. Glenn stood up and asked to be heard and said the exhibit was a preliminary records review and that a supplemental was filed later and that the date reflected a clerical practice in that office. Shepard said, "Counsel, was your client examined on the 10th of October?" "No, Your Honor." Was he examined at all before the 10th of October? Bellamy Glenn said, "No, Your Honor. That is the whole of the first hour. Nobody yelled. Nobody produced a photograph or a recording or a witness in a hat." A woman in her 20s who had already lost her career read a date off a stamp, and a lawyer had to say no twice. Liam Schwartz surrendered his license 14 days later rather than answer a summary suspension. I have his letter somewhere. It is 2 paragraphs, and it does not use the word sorry. The second hour belonged to Alan Wynne. He did not come in with a theory. He came in with 4 case numbers and a projector. Norfolk, Fredericksburg, Newport News, Roanoke. 4 counties. 4 old people who owned land. 4 petitions filed by the same attorney. 4 fee affidavits for limited liability companies, and 1 registered agent between them. At 1 address on East Main Street, 8 blocks from where we were sitting. Then he put up the closings. 11 weeks, 61 days, 9 weeks. He put up the buyer, same buyer, and then he put up Roanoke, and it did not have a closing on it, and he explained why. He said the name. He said Wendell Poe, 74, 31 years running, a block plant on Shenandoah Avenue, refused to sign. Placed in a secure unit outside Salem in May. Died there 11 months later. Natural causes. No autopsy because nobody asked. The estate sold the land 9 weeks after the funeral to the same buyer. Judge Shepard took his glasses off. He said the court would take a 10-minute recess. Nobody moved. I have been in rooms where a bid came in wrong and rooms where a man got hurt on my site. I have never been in a room where a judge offered 40 people 10 minutes and not one of them stood up. Shepard looked at the gallery for a moment. Then he put his glasses back on and said we would continue. Melanie Gates had one more question, and it was not for a witness. She said, "Your Honor, before we proceed to the documents, I would ask counsel for the petitioner one thing on the record. Miss Glenn, who paid for this filing?" Bellamy Glenn stood up. "She is very good. I have said that, and I will say it again. Your Honor, my client's fee arrangement is a matter of privilege. The fee affidavit is a public document," Gates said. "Your Honor, the affidavit speaks for itself." Shepard said, "Then let us hear it speak. Miss Glenn, who advanced the costs in this matter." And Bellamy Glenn, 44 years old, who had not made one wrong move in 6 weeks and had never once raised her voice, stood in front of that bench in a charcoal suit and did not answer. Not for 2 seconds. Not for 5. It went on long enough that the clerk looked up. "I want to tell you what my son did during that silence. Because he did not do anything, and that was the thing. He sat there with his hands flat on the table, and he did not turn around. But somebody else in that room moved. In the last row on the right, Beckham Herring stood up. He did it the way he does everything. No scrape of the chair. He buttoned the middle button of his jacket, and he stepped out into the aisle, and he walked the length of that courtroom to the double doors at the back. He passed within 9 feet of the table where Denver was sitting. He did not look at him. Not a glance, not a turn of the head. He walked past my son the way you walk past a chair in a hotel lobby. And he put his hand on that door. And he went out, and the door took its time closing the way those doors do. And that is when Denver turned around. He turned all the way around in his seat with his whole body like a boy. And he looked at an empty row and an empty aisle and a door that was still swinging. He was 41 years old, and he had been in that room since 9 o'clock in the morning. And that was the first time he had looked behind him. Bellamy Glenn moved to withdraw as counsel at 11:50. Judge Shepard granted it without one word of comment, which I understand better now than I did then. She gathered her things and went out through the same doors, and my son was left sitting at that table by himself. I know that table. I sat at it in a funeral suit 5 weeks earlier and turned around one time. Melanie Gates called him as an adverse witness. He was not represented, and Shepard told him so twice and told him he could decline, and Denver said he would answer. I have thought about why. I believe he still thought he could explain it. Gates gave him the whole stack, 11 documents in a binder clip, the way they came off that copier in July. "Mr. Mills, do you recognize these?" "Yes." "Did you sign all 11? "Yes." "Would you read into the record the first paragraph of the document marked as Exhibit 9? He read it. He got through it at a good clip, the way you read something in front of people, and he was 3/4 down the page before his voice changed. He did not stop. He slowed. He went from reading out loud to reading, which are two different things. And there is a moment where a man's mouth is still going and the rest of him has left the room. Indemnify and hold harmless are DIN Capital Partners and its affiliates, individually. Would you read Exhibit 10? Gates said. He read that Ashford Bluff Holdings had one managing member of record, that it was Denver Ray Mills, and that every other member was a Delaware address. He stopped in the middle of it and asked for water. The clerk brought it. And Exhibit 11, please. Exhibit 11 is one page. My son read 41 words off it, certifying that the medical documentation supporting the petition was accurate and complete to the best of his knowledge, signed by him, dated the 8th of October. 2 days before Bellamy Glenn walked into that clerk's office and filed a doctor's report about an examination that had not happened. Denver put the page down on the rail. Then he turned his head and looked at the last row on the right. There was nobody in it. There had been nobody in it for 2 hours. And I watched my son look at an empty chair for about 4 seconds and understand at 41 years old, in a courtroom in front of Ermias and Grady and 4 men off his father's cruise, that he had never been in business with anybody. He had been the part that gets crushed. Judge Shepard asked him one question. He said, "Mr. Mills, did you read those 3 documents before you signed them?" And my son said, "No, sir." Now, I could have let it end there. I had won. The order was going to be vacated. The man in the gray suit was gone, and the lawyer was gone, and the doctor was finished. And every single thing I had wanted on the morning Grady Duke knocked on my door was already sitting on that bench. All I had to do was stay in my chair. I asked Melanie Gates for a piece of paper, and I wrote 4 words on it and slid it to her, and she read it and looked at me a long moment, and then stood up and asked the court whether the respondent might be heard. Shepard said yes. I stood up at that table in a canvas coat. I did not ask that court for one thing. I want that understood. I did not ask for mercy for my son, and I did not ask for the charges to go anywhere but where they were going. And if you have been waiting 16 days for the part where a father saves his boy, this is not that. Here is what I said. I said that on the 14th of September, 1997, I was in a job trailer in Chesterfield County, signing the largest contract I had ever been offered. And the telephone in that trailer rang at 10 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, and I looked at it, and I did not answer it. I said I have never told that to another living person. Not to my daughter. Not to my second wife in 23 years of marriage. Not to the man who has been my friend since we were 24. I said Grady's wife found June on the kitchen floor at 10 minutes to 4. Then I said the rest of it, which is the part I had not known until I said it out loud. I said that in the 29 years since, I have not answered that telephone one time. I said I raised a boy in a house with the lights on and the bills paid and a father who was at a job site, and that when that boy got old enough to want something from me, I gave him a title and a parking space and a company that would not let him sign his own name. I said I have told myself my whole life that what a man builds will speak for him. I said I have 410 houses in this county, and not one of them has ever said a word. And then I said the thing I had written on that paper. I was not there. I said it is not a defense of him. He is 41 years old. He filed a petition to have his father declared incompetent, and he turned off a light my wife left on. He will answer for that, and he should. But I said the court should know that whatever got made in that man, I had a hand in the making of it, and that is not the whole of the accounting. Then I sat down. I did not look at my son, and he did not look at me. Judge Rogelio Shepard vacated the temporary guardianship, dismissed the petition with prejudice, and referred the entire file to the Office of the Attorney General. He said one more thing before he left the bench, and it was not to me. He said, "Mr. Mills, in 22 years I have signed 900 of these. I read every page of yours. It did not help." Then he was gone, and the room stood up, and it was over. They took Denver down the hall to an interview room with a man from Wynn's unit. No handcuffs, no arrest. Walking on his own 2 feet. He stopped in the aisle beside me. He did not say he was sorry. He did not ask me for anything. His mouth came open and shut once, and what came out of it after 16 days and 11 documents and 1 telephone call he hung up on was a word. Dad. And I have thought about it every day since, because I did not answer him. I did not answer him. He came at 10 o'clock that night. I heard the car before I heard him. You live on a street 44 years, you know the sound of every engine that has any business being there, and that one did not. Nova was at the sink. She turned the water off. "I'll go," she said. No. There were 3 knocks, and then nothing. He did not knock again. I have thought since that he must have stood out there a while working up to those 3. I went into the front hall, and I did not turn on the lamp. The door at 1400 Ellery has a light of frosted glass in the upper panel, put in by a man named Alcorn in 1951, and you cannot see a face through it. You can see that there is a shape, and whether it is standing. The shape was not standing. He had gone down onto the boards. On his knees on a porch, I laid myself in 1988, under a light I have not turned off in 29 years. I put my hand on the lock. I want to be accurate about the next part. My hand was on it. Not near it. On it, with my thumb on the thumb turn and the brass gone warm under it. And I stood there like that the whole time he talked. He said, "I know you're in there." He said, "You don't have to open it. I'm not asking you to open it." Then he told me the truth, and I will give him that much for the rest of my life. He did not make one excuse standing on those boards. He said he knew the report was wrong when he signed the certification. Not suspected, knew. He said Glenn told him it was a formality, and he knew what a formality means. And he signed it anyway, because if he had asked one question, the whole thing would have stopped. And he did not want it to stop. He said he never read the last 3 pages because he was afraid of what asking would make him look like. He said the money was not the reason. He said Herring told him in a conference room in July that Mills & Son would build Ashford Bluff and that it would be his job, his name on the permit, and that he would not have to call anybody about it. He said, "I wanted one building. That's the whole thing. I wanted one building that was mine." Then he was quiet a while. Then he said, "I turned your light off." I had not asked. Nobody had asked him. It had not come up in that courtroom, and it was never going to. He said he came up here the night after the hearing to get some of my things, and he stood on this porch, and he could not stand it being on, and he reached up, and he turned it off, and he sat in his car at the curb for 20 minutes afterward. He said, "I was 12. That is all he said about that. 2 words, and then nothing else for a long time. And I have understood ever since that those 2 words were the only thing he actually came here to say. The furnace came on under the floor. There is a section of duct in that crawl space that ticks when it warms, and it has ticked since 1991, and I have never fixed it. Wind moved the storm door in its frame once. The light through that frosted glass makes a pattern on the hall floor when it is on a yellow shape about the size of a bath towel, and it was lying across the boots next to my boots, and there was the shadow of a man's head and shoulders in the middle of it. Down the hall behind me, a plate went into the rack. Quiet, the way a person does it when they are trying to be quiet. The shadow moved and settled and did not go away. Somewhere off toward 25th Street, a dog started and stopped. I stood there with my thumb on that brass, and I looked at the shape on my floor for I do not know how long. Here is what I did. I did not open the door, and I did not turn off the light. I want to tell you why. Because it is the closest thing to an answer I have, and it is not much of one. That light does not belong to him. It never did. My wife put her hand on that switch every evening for 15 years for a man who was coming up the hill. And when she was gone, I left it on, because turning it off would have been a decision, and I could not make one. It has never once been a welcome. Anybody who has driven past this house at night and thought otherwise was wrong about it. I left it burning on my son because I was not going to let him have it, and I was not going to take it away. If you have got a cleaner word for that than the one I have, you are ahead of me. After a while, the shape came up off its knees. He did not say goodbye. The boards on the left side of the door have a cup in them from the sun, and they talk when you cross them, and I heard them talk. And then I heard the second step, and then the walk, and then a car door. Then the engine going down the hill toward Broad. Nova came out of the kitchen with a dish towel in her hands, and she did not ask me anything, which I think she got from her mother too. I went in there and stood between the sink and the stove. That is a space about 4 feet across. There are 2 boards near the stove that I cut short in 1983 and shimmed from underneath, and if you put your weight on the second one, It gives about a 1/16 of an inch and always has. I put my weight on it, and behind me the storm door caught the wind, and the latch turned over in the strike with a small metal sound, and my whole body went stiff from the neck down before one thought got anywhere near it. Because it is the same sound. I am 70 years old. I have a house and a company and a daughter in the next room, and a court order with my name cleared on it in a file in Henrico County. And it has been a long time now, and I still cannot hear a lock turn from the far side of a door without my hands stopping wherever they are. 11 days. They gave me back the house. They gave me back my name. Nobody has ever figured out what to hand a man to make up for 11 days, and I have stopped waiting for somebody to try. 7 months later, I am standing in my own front room with a tape measure in my hand. There is no reason for it. Nobody is building anything. I hooked the end on the baseboard the way I have 10,000 times and walked it out to the far wall, and the number is the same number it was in 1982. And I stood there and let the blade run back in on its own. There are 2 letters scratched into the back of that case with the point of a nail. Our den pulled out of the ridge in March. My son took a plea in April. Mills & Son is putting up 11 houses on Church Hill North this year, and every one of them is under $300,000. And Ermias runs that job. Here is what I did not know at 70. I spent my life believing that if a man builds enough and builds it square, the work will say the things he cannot say. I believed it so completely, I never once heard how it sounds out loud. 410 houses. Not one of them ever told a 12-year-old boy that his father was sorry he was 20 minutes away. Concrete does not talk. It only holds. The hard part is not learning that. The hard part is that I learned it in a courtroom in a canvas coat 29 years too late to keep one child, and just barely soon enough to keep the other. That is not a happy ending. It is the one I got. I tell you because God gives a man a certain number of evenings, and I gave mine away to job sites, and I did it thinking I was serving my family. If God has been merciful to me at all, it is that He left one person still willing to sit in my kitchen on a Tuesday. And I thank the Lord for that daughter every morning of my life. Let me ask you something, because I have not stopped asking myself. That night, my son knelt on my porch and told me the truth, and asked me for nothing. I left the light on. I did not open the door. If it were you standing in that hallway with your hand on the lock, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear it, especially if you think I got it wrong. And if this story reached you, stay with the channel. There are more of these than anybody wants to believe.